This week on Lightning Radio's Power Play.
Since the late 1970s, hockey fans have seen some legendary NHL teams. The dynasties of the Islanders and Oilers in the 1980s, the pinnacle of the Penguins' glory years, the stifling play of the Devils, the resurrection of hockey in Motown, all in the 90s. And more recently, a cap-era dynasty of the Chicago Blackhawks. But in this nearly 40-year time window, one team still is fondly remembered by hockey fans of all backgrounds. But this team never won a Stanley Cup, never made it to a conference final, and haven't played a game in 20 years.
Turgeon slipped through. He scores! Sylvain Turgeon, 2:36 of overtime, has won it for the Whalers.
Yes, it's been 20 years since the Hartford Whalers played a game. And even though the Whale didn't have a slew of championship banners hanging from the rafters of the Hartford Civic Center, the team is one of the most loved by hockey fans, with a memorable logo and a memorable, if not annoyingly catchy, goal song. Gone, but certainly not forgotten. We look back at the Hartford Whalers, with the players who donned the whale tail, the announcers who called the action, and the people who cover the team hockey fans just can't let go of. It's on this week's Power Play podcast, and it all starts in just 30 seconds.
This is Lightning Radio's Power Play.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, once again, let's have a greeting for your New England Whalers.
Here's your host, Matt Salmon.
What's old is new again, and going retro with team logos and jerseys is all the rage. Not just in hockey, but pretty much every professional sports league in North America. Go to any hockey game at any level, pro, college, even high school, and chances are you'll see a blue, green, and white whale tail on someone's shirt, hat, or jersey. Even here in Tampa Bay, the whale tail doesn't go away, and it mysteriously hasn't, even though the Whalers announced 20 years ago this spring they were moving operations to North Carolina, later to become the Carolina Hurricanes. For me, I've always had a soft spot in my heart for the Whalers, simply because on most nights in the early 90s, the Whalers were an easy 2 points. Their futility forever marked in a line from the 1995 cult classic Kevin Smith film, Mallrats.
What the hell are you doing?
Finishing my game?
No. You promised me breakfast.
Breakfast? Breakfast schmeckfast. Look at the score, for God's sake. I'm only in the middle of the second and I'm winning 12-2. Breakfast come and go, Renee. Now Hartford, the Whale, hey, they only beat Vancouver once, maybe twice in a lifetime.
But even though the Whalers and their mall-based NHL arena became the butt of jokes in the 1990s, the Whalers' birth and rise to the NHL was a story of persistence, a little luck, and a tremendously loyal fan base. The Whalers couldn't do much right in the 90s, but in the 70s, the upstart team, in an upstart professional hockey league, played its cards perfectly, despite all sorts of adversity on and off the ice. In the fall of 1971, Dennis Murphy and Gary Davidson were looking to stir up the sports pot once again. The two businessmen and promoters created the American Basketball Association in 1967, taking on the stuffy NBA with a fun and very colorful league, featuring three-point shots, red, white, and blue basketballs, and young stars like Julius Erving. In hockey, Murphy and Davidson had their sights set on the old guard of the NHL, and in particular, the reserve clause. Under the reserve clause, once a player signed his services over to an NHL club, they were connected to that club pretty much forever. That is, the player had little negotiation power. The team could trade, demote, or cut the player at any time. There was no free agency, no arbitration hearings, and salaries were suppressed, especially to the league's biggest stars, who were often signed to team contracts in their teenage years. The WHA not only had no reserve clause, it was going to bring hockey to markets that didn't want to wait for the laborious expansion of the NHL. Even though the NHL had expanded to 14 teams by 1971, the WHA sought to place teams in cities that felt they deserved professional hockey, and in cities that would go head-to-head with the NHL. One of those cities was Boston, home of the eventual Stanley Cup winning Bruins, a team that was in the midst of a potential dynasty. In November 1971, a WHA franchise was granted to a Boston-based business group, led by 28-year-old Howard Baldwin. The franchise agreed to play its home games in Boston Garden, with several games scheduled in the aging Boston Arena. The team would be named the Whalers, a nod to the region's history in whaling, but also because the first three letters of Whalers were, appropriately, W, H, and A. Elsewhere in the league, team owners went on a spending spree, sinking big dollars into deals with established NHL stars like Bobby Hull, Jerry Cheevers, and Derek Sanderson. For some teams, the big deals paid off, but for most, it was the first of many albatross deals that sunk franchises. The Whalers chose a different path, first signing legendary Boston University coach Jack Kelly to be the team's coach and general manager. While Kelly stocked the team with many overachieving but lesser-known American college players, he did find a few major hits for a minor price. The biggest name signing was former Bruin defenseman and team captain Ted Green.
I didn't know what to expect for myself or for the team at the start of the year. I should say for myself, but for the team, on paper it looks like we had a real good hockey club. A lot of experience on defensive goal and up front, and we were expected to have a real good year, and we were expected to finish in first place, which is what we did. As for myself, I was pretty apprehensive about the whole thing. But as the season went on, I could see that this league has great possibilities. The league is very competitive, and second half compared to the first half, we've drawn more fans.
The Whalers also signed Red Wings cast-off Tom Webster, who would go on to score 53 goals that season, and North Stars prospect Terry Caffrey, who would become the WHA's Rookie of the Year.
I think we've had a real successful season. I think fans-wise, we've averaged about 10,000 fans at the Gardens here. We ended up in first place, and this is what we were out to do in the beginning of the year, is have a first-place team in Boston. We knew we had to have a first-place team to compete with the Bruins, and a great point in the history of the Whalers was Tommy Webster scored 50 goals, and there's only 11 men in the history of Major League Hockey that have scored 50 goals.
While the rest of the fledgling league barely stayed on its feet, with big contracts and contentious battles with the NHL sinking nearly half of the 12 inaugural teams, the Whalers remained a model of consistency and success. The team finished the season with the best record in the league and breezed through the playoffs, knocking off $1 million bonus boy Bobby Hull and his Jets in 5 games to win the first Avco World Cup trophy. From the very start, the Whalers were number one. But soon they dealt with the same struggles other WHA teams dealt with. Getting squeezed out of Boston and losing money, the Whalers needed a new home away from the shadow of the Bruins. While temporarily setting up shop in Springfield, Massachusetts for the next year and a half, Whalers ownership met with Hartford Courant writer Frank Keyes. Keyes was to Hartford what Tom McEwen was to Tampa, a sports writer with connections to every mover and shaker in town. Hartford was building a new convention center complex downtown to revive a city that was suffering from the flight to the suburbs. Along with the convention center and mall, an arena was part of the project and needed a tenant. Keyes was a big hockey fan, and bringing in the defending WHA champions would solve 2 problems. The project, to be known as the Hartford Civic Center, would have its arena tenant, and the Whalers would have a modern home rink to call their own, something most WHA teams did not have. An agreement was made, and on January 11th, 1975, the Whalers played their first home game in Hartford, coming back to defeat the San Diego Mariners 4-3 in overtime in front of a sellout crowd.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, a moment that we've all been waiting for, the opportunity to meet and greet your New England Whalers.
While the WHA wasn't the NHL, Hartford had a professional sports team, and the residents quickly latched on to their home team.
Smith, he takes a tumble, Swade, back to Lee, his big drive, scores! And the one! Get out your seat, your tickets marked C, because there's hockey at the Hartford Civic Center next Friday night. Standing ovation, they're tearing the place apart here at Hartford. The Whalers win it 3-2 in sudden death overtime.
Given the fact the Whalers continued to be a contender helped, as did the fact that this was the mid-70s, a time when old-time hockey was often the main attraction.
15 feet inside the line. Here's Butters, sneaks the shot on Plow. Bill Butters from behind. That's all. Here comes the bench. We've got a wild brawl here now. Lee is in on Butters. McCartan picks off French. We've got a wild brawl here at the Civic Center. Both benches emptied. Al Smith involved. Players fighting everywhere inside the St. Zone. Everyone paired off for TU now in Carlson. Two players wrestling down there. It looks like Hank Slavin, Bob. I'll tell you, that's one of the most ungentlemanly, sneaky, just plain rotten things I've ever seen. Butters came from behind, came up behind Plow and cold-cocked him from behind. Smith and Garrett are at it. And here we go again. It's Smith and Garrett. It's Garrett. But Garrett hasn't taken off his mask. And now Nick and Carlson come together. And now Nick wants Carlson. That's obvious. This may be the main event. He was just holding two Saints, one in each hand. Oh, Carlson just cold-cocked Nick. And Nick comes right back at him. Here they go for TU and Carlson. Look at them slugging each other.
The Whalers had stability, but the rest of the WHA didn't. In 1976, Baldwin had become the president of the league and was actively trying to merge the WHA with the NHL. But the old guard NHL owners rebuffed every merger plan, and the battles for big-name players continued between the two rival leagues. The Whalers were at the heart of one of the biggest rifts that year, as the team was still trying to make it into the NHL and looking to sign the biggest stars. Baldwin scored a major coup in May of 1977, when the Whalers outbid the Red Wings, Bruins, and Canadiens in securing the rights of the Howe family, Mark, Marty, and Mr. Hockey, Gordy. The Howes had left Houston as the Arrows' future hung delicately in the balance of the continued failed merger attempts. With hockey's greatest player and his up-and-coming sons alongside him, the Whalers were one step closer to going big time. Unfortunately, the WHA wasn't any closer, as merger negotiations failed again in 1978 and the league decreased in size from 8 teams to 6. While it looked like the roof was caving in on the WHA, it literally did in Hartford on January 18, 1978. Just hours after a college basketball game concluded, the massive weight of snow collected on the arena roof caused the roof to cave in. The damage was extensive and would require a 2-year rebuild. For most WHA teams, it would have been a death knell. But for the Whalers, it offered a surprising show of support by their fans and the business community. The businesses that made up the ownership group of the team decided to stick it out, traveling to Springfield again for home games in the foreseeable future. Only about 300 season ticket accounts were canceled, as eventually more than 4,200 season ticket holders would make up the 91 Club, named after the interstate fans drove on to attend games in Springfield. Despite this inconvenience, the Whalers rallied around their hardy fans and advanced to the Avco Cup final again in 1978, this time falling to the Jets in 4 straight. Finally, in 1979, the fans in Hartford would get their wish. Not only was their home arena going to be ready for the next hockey season, the Whalers were going to the NHL. In March of 1979, Baldwin secured a merger agreement. The Oilers, Nordique, and Jets would join the Whalers in the 1979-80 NHL season. By request from the Bruins, the Whalers would change their identity from New England to Hartford. While this placated the Bruins, this also made the Whalers officially Hartford's team. Moving back into the renovated Hartford Civic Center in February of 1980, the team was finally officially home. Even though the Whalers qualified for the Stanley Cup playoffs in 1980, making an early first-round exit, it was a long road to becoming successful in the NHL. 5 consecutive seasons of missing the playoffs meant long summers in Hartford, but it also meant plum positions in the amateur entry draft. Ron Francis was selected 4th overall in 1981. Kevin Dineen, Ulf Samuelsson, and Ray Ferraro arrived in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds, respectively, in 1982. And Sylvain Turgeon was selected 2nd overall in 1983. While the fans waited for the youth to mature into a good hockey team, the existing team was very active in the community, with Mr. Hockey himself, retired as a player in 1980, playing the role of community ambassador. This was apparent to the team's new TV play-by-play announcer in 1984, Rick Peckham.
Hartford obviously was a very unique market. It was a small market, but it was a very community-oriented type of market where it was the town's team. And having Gordie Howe there, as at that point when I got there, he was a community ambassador, helped out in a lot of different areas, kind of a precursor to what we see with a lot of teams with Dave Andrechuk and others now. But having someone of that stature in the community, always available, and he was so affable and he was so friendly that he just fit in with the attitude of the community. I used to say this about Ron Francis because the community relations department of the Whalers was so active throughout the entire state that if you didn't meet Ron Francis at some point, you've been in hiding somewhere, you've been under a rock. Same thing applied to Gordie, probably more so, because he was out representing the team in so many different ways. And that was one of the fun recollections of my time in Hartford, was the fact that in the off season, we'd play these charity softball games. There might be 9 or 10 of them, and a lot of the players spent the entire summer in Hartford. They had jobs. Francis, Quenville, Tippett, they had regular jobs trying to set themselves up for life after hockey. And Gordie's there, and you're sitting maybe at a high school softball field or something on a wooden bench, and Gordie Howe's sitting next to you, and he's playing first base, and you're taking on the local police department or whatever. And he was just great, and everybody knew him, and it was not this hockey icon. It's Gordie, everybody's friend, and representing the Whalers. It was a fantastic situation.
Greg Millen, now a broadcaster with the Toronto Maple Leafs, arrived in Hartford in 1981 as a rare free agent after 3 years in Pittsburgh. Millen saw plenty of Howe off the ice, but as a goaltender, he saw Howe all too often practicing with the team on the ice. And the old man still had it.
He would come out with us in his sweats, always. I couldn't stop him as a goalie. I don't even know how old he was at that point. He used to giggle all the way up the ice. The puck has eyes as he rattled it off the far post and laugh all the way up the ice. He still loved the game. He'd go out and kill penalties on the point in the power play without any equipment, and the guys would try to fire pucks by him, and he'd knock them out of midair. It was absolutely remarkable, and to have Gordie Howe on the ice was extremely special. And then you can add David Keon to that list as well, who was with us. Ronnie Francis' first road roommate was David Keon, and to have David around the team and to one of my childhood idols coming from Toronto and growing up in Toronto was something that was very special.
The team did well off the ice to keep fans engaged, but on the ice, it was still a struggle. As the number one goalie for a team being built from the ground up, Millen learned firsthand any success in Hartford would be hard-earned, and a while in the making.
Well, it was a great learning experience for me because I ended up being a 60-game-a-year goalie on a bad team, which was a real test of, your ability to hang in throughout the course of a season mentally and stay with it and compete. There were some really difficult times in Hartford. They were in a growth stage. There were some issues off the ice as well with management. It took its toll. I suppose the bright spot for me when I was there, one of them was that Ron Francis was a budding 18-year-old that lived with us for a couple of years, and to watch him grow and develop as a young man and athlete, to see where he is today even, was certainly rewarding at the time and still is.
Selecting great players with high draft selections is easy, but actually building a contending team around them required a master architect. And the Whalers found their architect finishing off his latest project in St. Louis.
Dear Montreal, Boston, Buffalo, and the rest of our friends in the National Hockey League. This is just a gentle reminder that you're in for a few surprises, because the new St. Louis Blues have put the check back in the Checkerdome.
Emile the Cat Francis. He coached the Rangers to some of their best seasons in the late 60s and early 70s, and he had just put the St. Louis Blues back on the map in the late 70s. The Whalers hired him as general manager in 1983, and with former Rangers defenseman and teammate and three-time CHL champion head coach Jack Evans behind the bench, the pieces started coming together off the ice.
Jack Evans, and on my left will be our new assistant coach, Claude LaRose. We've known one another for a good number of years. We're teammates together at one time, and also we played against one another, but I've always had a great amount of respect for Jack Evans because of the fact that what he can get out of players. He's not only a disciplinarian, but he's also an excellent teacher, which is important with young hockey players.
One of the first pieces was a rugged defenseman out of Windsor, Ontario. Traded from Toronto to Colorado in the Lanny McDonald deal, Joel Quenneville continued his wacky and wild trip to Hartford in 1983.
We're in Colorado when we put that franchise out of business and moved to New Jersey, and then the next year in Jersey we had a tough year. It was the first year Jersey had a team, and we had, I think, between the Whalers and Hartford that year, I think we were near the bottom of the league, and the team, I give Emile Francis a ton of credit for rebuilding the team and establishing some winning tradition around there, and but we took our lumps that first year in Hartford, and you went there, and you didn't know I went from Jersey to there, and I thought it was a real nice fit and good opportunity, and things worked out well there for for a stretch of years there, and but it was a good group. I think a real young team at that time, and I think we all got together there, and things worked out well, and Kevin and a bunch of them all came in there that big draft year. They had some 2 or 3 years in a row that we were 5 or 6 deep in the drafts making the NHL. That group came into the team there, took us to the next level.
Also part of that team, another current head coach, Dave Tippett, a free agent signee with the Whalers after Team Canada's 1984 Olympic run in Sarajevo.
It was a great experience because it was a small market, and we had a real good group of players there that, the core of the team was together a long time. We're still all very good friends to this day. It was a little bit of a change because now, players play in the city, but a lot of them don't live there. We had everybody lived in Hartford in the summer. I mean, our families were all close. It was a real unique situation in pro sports. I think that's kind of waning from our pros teams now, just with a lot of player movement and salary caps and things like that. But it was a unique situation. That it was a very close team, run very well by Emile Francis when he was there, and it's I still have a lot of very close friends from on that team, and a lot of great memories, and learned a lot from not just the players but the people that were involved in that organization.
Dineen, the son of former New England Whaler and Houston Aeros head coach Bill Dineen, would also make his way onto the team in 1984, as did Ferraro and Turgeon. But while this group of young stars started making an impression, it was the oldest young star that led the way, Ron Francis, or as he was better known to Whalers fans, Ronnie Franchise. Some players have it, not just the skills on the ice, but the hockey smarts, leadership capabilities, and eagerness to keep learning and keep winning. Millen says he saw Francis had it early on.
Right from the very start. Ronnie Francis is a class individual, a very bright man, and he was no different as an 18-year-old. Well beyond his years, extremely well brought up, and it's a real pleasure that we've, obviously have a great friendship today that started way back when he was an 18-year-old.
With the young Francis growing into a star in Hartford and his teammates growing with him, the fortunes for the Whalers turned. And with that came a whole lot more brass bonanza. Yes, another big reason why the Whalers are still well-loved. Their not-so-well-loved goal song, a catchy little ditty from 1967, written, performed, and produced by Belgian composer Jacques Isaiah, the grandson of world-renowned violinist Eugene Isaiah. The name of the song, officially, is Evening Beat, but by the time Isaiah sold the song as part of a music library, it somehow earned the name Brass Bonanza. When the Whalers were looking for some bridge music in a season-in-review LP record in 1976, the connection between the song and the team was forever cemented.
This is the story of the New England Whalers and the city of Hartford. We'll begin with the courting stage of this very unlikely marriage. The Whalers, a hockey team without a city. Hartford, a city without a team.
In an interview in the Hartford Courant in 2010, Baldwin admitted the song was catchy, but unpopular. Jack Kelly hated it, as did most of the hockey operations department. But Baldwin sided with George Ducharme, the director of operations for the Whalers, who lobbied to use the song as a fight song and a goal song. While many within the Whalers hated the song, opposing teams despised it. After being traded to St. Louis in 1985 for Mike Liut, Millen got the full wrath of Brass Bonanza at the other end of the ice in the Civic Center.
Yeah, I think most players will tell you they weren't very fond of it. I don't think we were as players either, to be honest. And we would have liked to have heard it a few more times than we did when I was in Hartford, but we didn't. But yeah, it was a song that became a little annoying, I think it's fair to say. But it was certainly it was part of the identity of the Hartford Whalers.
By 1985-86, the Whalers were rocking and rolling in their own right. After missing the playoffs for 5 straight seasons, the Whalers went on a tear in the final 18 games, going 12-3-3 to secure a playoff berth.
Gives to Anderson. Deneen's with him. Great end-to-end action. Kevin Deneen. Shooting. Score!
In the Adams Division semifinals, the Whalers brought down the division champion Quebec Nordique in 3 straight games.
They'll count it down.
For the first time in franchise history, and as it would turn out the only time in Hartford, the Whalers advanced to the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. There, they would lock horns with the established Montreal Canadiens, going 7 games, then to double overtime, for the first of many Hartford heartbreaks.
Brisebois fired one up to the corner. Frank Pietrangelo out of the net, leaving it for Richards, the defenseman. He lost it. Corson is up. The puck centered. Cardinal turned. Scored! Cardinal wins the game for the Canadiens.
We had some pretty good teams there. We had a couple decent runs. We had a parade that might have been a little bit enthusiastic at the time, but it was still some good memories. A lot of really and a great group of guys. Had a great run to get in the playoffs. Had a great first round against Quebec, and then Game 7 overtime loss. Montreal went on to win the Cup that year in '86. But we were playing our best hockey that we probably ever played together at that stretch, and obviously very big disappointment there. And think of Jack Evans standing behind their bench there, and you look at all the coaches you played for or with and worked with here, and great memories thinking about Jack right now when we're talking about the Whale.
Of course, players like Quenneville had no idea that would be as far as the Whalers would go. But with hindsight being 20/20, Tippett acknowledges had the Whalers had some more deeper playoff runs, maybe things would have turned out differently for the club.
You always like to think that. We were a small market team going against, like you say, the big teams. You had Montreal and Boston, essentially just legendary teams then. And you always, in the playoffs, you always had to go through your own division. We had the one good playoff win against Quebec, and then took Montreal to 7 games. But you always wonder if you could have went by there and moved on a little bit. Could that have really spurred the interest it needed and to move it from maybe a small market to a real contender?
The Adams Division was murder back then. The Nordiques were at their best, and the Bruins and Canadiens were consistently at the top of their game throughout the decade. Even the Sabres could be a tough draw, as long as they got more points than the 4th-place team in the Patrick Division, which wasn't always the case. The following season, the Whalers had their best year, winning the division with 93 points, trailing only the Flyers for the top spot in the Wales Conference. Feeling the energy of one of the most successful stretches in franchise history, the Whalers did what other successful teams did in the mid-'80s. They made a god-awful music video.
Be a part of Whaler Mania. Be a part of the fun. Come see the Hartford Whalers become hockey's number one. Be a part of the excitement. Be a part of the team. Bring the Stanley Cup to Hartford. It's the Hartford Whalers' dream. Be a part.
If you thought Brass Bonanza was tough to listen to, whew. From that same video, the team had some lighthearted moments to share with fans, including Peckham's interview with Captain Francis at the team's flagship radio station.
As captain of the Whalers, and you kind of like to keep everybody informed about the Whalers, would you say these are kind of like Franklin Roosevelt's fireside chats, just keeping everybody informed as to what's going on with the Hartford Whalers?
Franklin Roosevelt. Wait a minute here.
We're getting really deep here.
We are getting deep. I don't have an answer to that one.
And things got on the more personal side with Ulf Samuelsson sharing his off-season plans to Peckham.
Now, you seem to have adjusted well to life over here. You're playing good hockey. You've made a TV commercial. Anything else on the horizon for you?
Well, I was going in a little bit in the modeling later on this year, so we'll see how that turns out. I'm, trying to export Swedish underwear, so I'll see how that works out.
Are those bikini underwear or is this long underwear?
Those are bikini underwears.
Yes, before there was TMI, there was ULF, and aside of Ulf, not too many of us want burned into our memories. The fun didn't last long, though, as the Whalers suffered the same fate as the Nordiques did a year before, losing in the first round of the 1987 Stanley Cup playoffs to Quebec, with Peter Stastny nailing the coffin shut in overtime of Game 6.
Rochefort derrière son filet regroupe les siens. 14 minutes exactement à jouer à cette première période de surtemps. En deux, vers Peter, il s'en va seul! Seul avec Liut! Goal!
The Whalers would appear in the playoffs in each of the next 5 seasons, but they would never advance past the first round, never win another division title, and never top attendance records set during this time. With attendance and performance at a high, it was time for the owners to sell high. In the summer of 1988, the Whalers were sold to Donald Conrad and Richard Gordon, a relationship that quickly split, causing the first of several ownership changes over the next several years. Despite the team's on-ice fortunes, things were getting shaky off the ice, shaking the core of the team in a series of trades. None bigger than the one that happened on March 4th, 1991. That and the final dwindling days of NHL hockey in Hartford, next, when the Power Play podcast continues in 30 seconds.
Lightning Radio's Power Play continues. Here's your host, Matt Salmon.
Heading into the 1990-91 season, the Hartford Whalers were once again considered a playoff contender, but not necessarily a Stanley Cup contender. In its third season of ownership under Richard Gordon, the team was starting to hemorrhage money. Salaries were starting to go up in the NHL. Teams in larger markets took advantage of higher ticket prices and better broadcast deals. And the Whalers simply couldn't keep up. Under new general manager Ed Johnston, the exciting Whalers teams of the mid-'80s started getting picked apart in a whirlwind of deals that yielded very little in return. Just days before the start of the season, and in trades just 4 days apart, Joel Quenneville and Dave Tippett were traded for future considerations to Washington. Following a 4-4 tie to Toronto on March 3, 1991, Ron Francis was settling into an evening with his family, his wife, infant daughter, and his parents who were in town. Trade rumors had swirled all season, but according to Francis, Johnston had reassured him he wasn't going anywhere. But that night, the phone rang at the Francis home. Johnston had made a deal, sending Francis, Ulf Samuelsson, and Grant Jennings to Pittsburgh for John Cullen, Zarley Zalapsky, and Jeff Palmer. It was a trade that raised eyebrows then, and 6 years later, the Hartford Courant called it heart and soul for a piston, camshaft, and door handle. While the ownership issues started the franchise down a slippery slope, trading the franchise put the Whalers in a downward direction for good. And just 5 days after the trade, Whalers TV announcer Rick Peckham had the unenviable task of interviewing visiting Pittsburgh Penguin Ron Francis during intermission.
Mr. Whaler has joined us, or at least he was known as that for almost 10 full seasons with the Whalers, now wearing a very strange uniform, Ron Francis, in his second game since the trade to Pittsburgh. And Ronnie, it's been 5 days since then. Has the shock worn off?
Oh, yeah, I think so. It's just a hectic 12 hours. You get the phone call, you're talking to reporters and friends, probably from about 9:30 to about 1 in the morning. You're trying to get your stuff packed so you can get out of town the next morning on a 7:30 flight. And it was just a busy 24-hour period from the time I got the phone call till the time I played the next night in Pittsburgh. But, we're starting to settle a little bit more, and I just think as time goes by and I get more relaxed, I think things will work out fine.
Greg Millen, then winding down his playing career and starting up his broadcasting career, knew the trade wasn't going to help the Whalers regardless of the return.
It certainly didn't help. I mean, he was the cornerstone of the franchise, and As I mentioned, there were a lot of off-ice challenges with that team at the time, and that was a horrific trade for the community. There's no question, as he was embedded in the community and did a lot besides just being a hockey player. So that didn't help, but the market just didn't seem to be able to sustain the team. And like a lot of teams, if you continually lose and lose and lose and not have success in any of the American markets, often things start to go south, and that's what happened in Hartford.
Mark Pucalo, then a writer covering the Whalers for the Hartford Courant, notes the Francis trade was the peak of frustration for Whalers fans.
It was a frustrating time because at times they looked very good. They played well for stretches, and then they'd go through these long losing streaks. And then obviously the whole thing that maybe changed everything was the whole Ron Francis, Ulfi Samuelson trade for John Cullen and Zarley Zalapsky. That sort of changed everything. It started to go downhill even more.
Frustrations would continue, with the team missing the playoffs for the first time in 8 seasons in the 1992-93 season. Months later, Gordon signed a new lease agreement with the Connecticut Development Authority, getting to play in the Civic Center rent-free in exchange for surrendering all club, luxury box, and parking revenue to the CDA. Now, this ancillary revenue seems like small potatoes compared to gate revenue and broadcast agreements, but over the course of a 41-game home schedule, it adds up. On the ice, things worsened, with the maddening hire of former Penguins assistant coach Pierre Maguire as head coach in 1993.
Well, I think the players have responded to the discipline we're trying to get them to play with on the ice, and that's to play smart and hard in all 3 zones and be very aware of their jobs, and I think so far they've responded very well.
Maguire is a good tactician, and with the second worst offense in the league, Hartford needs a new offensive strategy. Maguire's was something of a surprise, however. On a recent road trip, he left behind the team's 2 top forwards, Michael Nylander and Jeff Sanderson.
That was pretty upsetting to me. I was thought I'd played, pretty well for the first 15 games of the season, and to be left back like that, it kind of, it makes you sit back and think, and maybe that's what I needed. They felt that their effort wasn't up to the standards that we expect from 2 young players with that much talent, and I wanted them to think about it, so they thought about it, and both have performed admirably since.
Players rebelled, and several got in trouble with the law in numerous incidents in the spring of 1994. Maguire was relieved of his duties shortly after the season ended, with the Whalers missing the playoffs again. Hartford quickly became a destination nobody wanted to go to, with players asking to leave as soon as they arrived in trades. In the summer of 1994, Peter Karmanos, the opposition bidder to Phil Esposito in Tampa Bay's expansion bidding in 1990, became the Whalers' new owner as he purchased the club from the CDA, which had taken over the team from Gordon. With Paul Holmgren back in the general manager's chair and behind the bench as head coach, the Whalers were looking to bounce back on the ice, while Karmanos looked for a new building for the team to play in. As new arenas were opening up across the NHL in the mid-90s, the 20-year-old Civic Center Arena and its capacity of just under 15,000 was becoming a major liability to the club. While Karmanos tried to get a new arena, Holmgren, now solely the GM with 28-year-old Paul Maurice coaching, found a new leader on the ice. After getting traded to Philadelphia in 1991 for Murray Craven and playing for his father Bill Dineen, Kevin Dineen came back home in December 1995.
Yeah, I think you're always associated with the first team you play for, who drafted you, where you've spent a number of your formative years, and go to Philly, a great experience there. But I married a girl from Hartford, and one of my better acquisitions, and so we got that done. And to go back to Hartford was just a great experience. It was only a 2-year stint before we did move the franchise to Carolina, but here we are, as you say, 20 years later, and a lot of teams and a lot of jerseys over the years, most by choice, some by not, but I'll tell you, you're always still associated. When people look back at your career, they'll probably say, you played for the Whalers.
The Whalers finished 11 points behind the Lightning for the final playoff berth in 1996. And while in a frantic race in 1997 to get into the postseason, Karmanos dropped a bombshell on March 26th. With all attempts at getting a new arena exhausted, and a season ticket push stalling well short of its goal, the club was leaving Hartford for North Carolina. For Pukalo, it wasn't a surprise to him that it came to this.
I think nobody wanted to believe it, but when you come right down to it, Peter Karmanos didn't have anything to do with Connecticut. He just bought a business. He moved there, and you had to wonder if things didn't get, if the government and the people around the team didn't work with him to make it work a little bit better, that he was going to pull out of there at some point. But I think still everybody thought that politicians would be able to figure out ways to get it done, and they didn't. And a lot of people blame Karmanos more. I blame the politicians more for not valuing the franchise enough.
For Dineen, the team's playoff push was bittersweet and once again came up short as the team was eliminated from contention literally one day before their final game.
Everything culminated in our last game, which, if I recall, happened to be against the Lightning, and it was a kind of a night for a lot of people. When people go to a hockey game, they're there to enjoy their team. They also might have sat next to somebody for the past 10 or 15 years that they shared season tickets with, or just happen to get to know that in their section. So there's a little bit of a social aspect to it. And when that's being taken away from me, I think it made for, like I say, a very emotional night.
The last game, and the last game at the Hartford Civic Center, came on April 13th against the Lightning. For new Whalers TV announcer John Forsland, it wasn't just any other game.
The Hartford Whalers are home for the final time. Our Sports Channel cameras are inside the Hartford Civic Center to capture the emotion of this historic day. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Forsland. As always, thanks for joining us. Well, it's the meaningless game with tremendous meaning. Both teams, the Hartford Whalers, the Tampa Bay Lightning, have been eliminated from Stanley Cup playoff contention. But for Whaler fans and the team, today means everything.
Leading 1-0 in the second period, Dineen would come through with the final goal in Hartford Whalers history.
Puck is loose this way. Sanderson after it. Castles behind the goal, right out in front. There's Dineen. He scores! Hey, what do you say, Captain Dineen? 2-0 Whalers.
Let the record show Dino Ciccarelli would get the last goal scored in the Civic Center. But the Lightning couldn't get anything else against netminder Sean Burke, as professional hockey played out its final seconds that afternoon.
It's over, folks. It's been a great ride. The Whalers will go out winners.
Pleasure to be associated with you, the fans, for your support and the enthusiasm you show in this building. There's none other. And on behalf of all the players that have left Hartford and the guys that are sitting on this bench, we just want to say thank you from all of us. God bless, and thank you very much.
There were some half-hearted attempts by politicians and business people to buy the Whalers back from Karmanos and try to keep them in Hartford. But the horse was already out of the barn, and it was heading south on I-95 to the Tar Heel State. The newly christened Carolina Hurricanes, ironically, would open the 1997-98 season in Tampa in a 4-2 loss against the Lightning.
And it comes to Saviner, and he clears down the ice. Ciccarelli is out of the penalty box, near corner. Kidd will take it. Kidd being caught by Ciccarelli. Ciccarelli blocks the puck. Cut behind the net around the right post. Stops it and scores! Stops it and scores! Yes, sir! Yes, sir! Yes, sir! Bad play by Trevor Kidd. Taken away by Ciccarelli. Came around the left post. Stufferer with the Lightning lead it by the score of 1-0.
Going back home was an adventure for the Hurricanes. The team's new arena in Raleigh was still under construction. So in true Whalers fashion, the Hurricanes played its home games away from home. 80 miles away from home, in the cavernous and aging Greensboro Coliseum. For Chuck Caton, the Whalers announcer since NHL Day 1 in 1979, who moved with the team to North Carolina, the travel was a bit tough to overcome at times.
Players settled in the Raleigh area. They had about an hour and 20-minute drive to Greensboro on days of games.
The team the first year on days of games had the team stay at a local hotel in Greensboro. Then the second year, players really didn't want to spend the whole day there. They drove back and forth. They had morning skates in Raleigh and then reported to the Greensboro Coliseum at night. Then there would be times where, what do you do with your car when we have a back-to-back? I know the worst thing we ever had, we had to play in Ottawa after playing in Greensboro. We had to take a bus from the airport to the Greensboro Coliseum, leave our cars at the airport in Raleigh because we were leaving from Greensboro but flying back to Raleigh after the trip to Ottawa. And, of course, bring your passports, the whole shebang when you're playing. And that was probably the worst road trip of all. But luckily, I believe we only went to Canada once on a back-to-back.
But like the Whalers did so many times, the Hurricanes eventually prevailed, appearing in the playoffs in 1999, ending a 6-year drought. One big reason why the Hurricanes started going upward again? The return of the franchise, Ron Francis. After his contract with the Penguins expired in 1998, the Hurricanes settled into Raleigh for good in 1999 and finally advanced past the second round of the playoffs with a surprising run to the Stanley Cup Final in 2002. But that was the year for one more championship for Scotty Bowman and his Red Wings. Francis would retire from the NHL after the 2003-2004 season, but after the 2005 lockout, it was the Hurricanes finally reaching the mountaintop, beating, of all teams, the last remaining WHA team, the Edmonton Oilers, in 7 games for the Stanley Cup. Francis is back with the organization, now the club's general manager, helping piece together a surprising team that this season has made a push for the playoffs. But what may be more surprising is the number of former Whalers in management or coaching positions in the NHL. Francis in Carolina, Marc Bergevin in Montreal, Todd Richards in Tampa, Dave Tippett in Arizona, and Quenneville and Dineen together in Chicago.
Yeah, a lot of coaches, a lot of managers. Ronnie. You think of, you can go down the list. Every team's probably has somebody that played for the Whale in whether it's assistant coach, head coach, managers, agents. So it's been, can't forecast that type of stuff, and I don't think anybody would have thought Kevin and I would be coaching together at any stage of the game when we're playing together. So that's probably as far out there as anything that's happened when you're looking back and thinking when we're playing, nobody foresaw this happening.
I probably, again, a reflection on the management staff there, that they were looking for players with a certain kind of characteristics, and it seemed to follow through that probably more than you can say, hockey IQ. I'm not really buying that, but I would say there certainly was a passion for the game, a bunch of guys that really enjoyed the game and being around it and have been extremely fortunate to stay in the game, and whether it's behind a microphone, a desk, or blowing a whistle every day. I think it's certainly a neat thing to go into a lot of rinks and see John Anderson across the way, or see Pat Verbeek here in town, or like I said, Rick Peckham earlier, all good people and all people that we're fortunate to be associated with.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys that went through there that either turned into coaches or management, and Michael Ute is an agent, Ray Ferraro was in the probably where he should have been in the talking business, so it was, like I say, it was a very close group, and stayed very close friends since, and a lot of smart hockey guys, like there's, Joe Quenneville, Mike Liute, Ronnie Francis, Kevin Dineen, Ulf Samuelsson is another one, just a lot of real good, smart hockey guys, and we spent a lot of time talking about the game way back then.
Tippett has certainly dealt with uneasiness off the ice in Arizona the last few years. And he knows as soon as a team shows a lack of attendance and winning, everyone wants the team to move to Quebec City or Hartford. So that begs the question, can the NHL ever, realistically, return to Hartford?
I don't think you can say never. It's I haven't been there a long time. I'm not sure what the business side of things is doing down there right now, but I know it was a great franchise when we were there. My wife used to go to the game. She goes, I felt like I knew about 5,000 people there, out of the 15,000 would come. So it was a close community. The community really supported the team. It was a real good experience for all of us who were there. I would love to see a team go back there, but whether it's financially feasible, times will tell.
There are 3 things guaranteed in life: death, taxes, and some politician in Connecticut promising to bring the Whalers back. Everyone I spoke to hopes something could happen. But at the same time, they say don't get your hopes up.
I don't see it. They don't have a building to begin with that would probably be good enough for this day and age in the National Hockey League. So that's the first problem. And so that would be an issue. And meanwhile, Quebec is ready to go. So I think they would be first in line if, in fact, there was a situation where the league wanted to go there.
We saw that earlier on this year where the Whale came back as a possibility with the Isle. Heard that out there. I don't know whether it's quantifying percentage-wise the likelihood of that happening. I don't know if it's a stretch or not. Who knows? I know that major disappointment when they left. Some ground swelling there a couple of times in between that time. Tough to say. I don't know. It's I'm not probably going to give you. I don't know the real answer.
Yeah. That's certainly a tough one. That's above a assistant coach's pay grade, making those decisions, And I know there's a lot of teams, whether it's Winnipeg or Las Vegas, that wanted teams back, and abracadabra, it happened. So you never say no, but Quebec's sitting out there with a beautiful arena. There's lots of challenges, but certainly there would be a hardcore fan base off the get-go if the Whale did come back.
I don't think so, because I don't think Gary Bettman will allow it. I mean, it's all about television today, and that market is fractionalized between the Rangers and the Bruins, and to a lesser extent the Devils and the Islanders. I really don't see it happening. There are a lot of zealous fans. I don't think there's enough corporate support. That's something we fight in Raleigh from a corporate angle as well. The Hurricanes can do a lot better with that. But no, I can't see a move to either Quebec City because of the dollar differential or Hartford. I know it's a very sexy thing to say they have the new Videotron Arena in Quebec, but I don't think anybody in Quebec, any ownership group, is going to pay the equivalent of what Vegas paid in Canadian dollars. It'd probably be about $650 to $700 million just to get a franchise if they hold to that $500 million franchise fee that they did for Vegas.
Well, I've said this to many people, and the only way that it will ever come back to Hartford is if they find a Jeff Finnick a clone, somebody that would embrace the Hartford area and have a lot of money and say, I'm gonna do this because I think this is a good area. There's a lot. Connecticut's a really great hockey state, and there's a lot of fans there. To really embrace the area and start something good. And I think that's the only way it would happen, but I don't know if that person exists.
So there may not be an NHL team in Hartford again, but there was the short-lived Connecticut Whale in the AHL and the current Connecticut Whale in the NWHL. It's still not the Whale, though, and who knows if we'll ever see it again. But one thing's for sure, for a team that had its share of issues off the ice, and not many banners hanging in the rafters for on-ice accomplishments, the Whalers are strangely alive and well, and loved 20 years later.
You've seen that happen with other franchises from other sports, but I think the Whalers definitely, and it's a funny thing, I went to get a haircut the other day in Riverview, and I'm sitting getting finished up with my hair, and the next guy in line wearing a Whalers shirt. I'm thinking, oh, you a Whalers fan? No, I was just in the Hartford airport, and they got a big store there, and I bought it. So yeah, I mean the stuff is still out there, and people love it.
Joel, you played over 800 games in the NHL. You've had tremendous coaching success here in Colorado and St. Louis. But how often is the icebreaker in any conversation with a fan, hey, I remember you with Hartford?
I remember, the Connecticut people do remember the Whale and remember our playing days, and we had some good years. We had some good experiences, and like Kevin was reminiscing about, that community was such a, the Whalers are such a big part of the local environment. It was almost like socially a thing. It was the only game in town, the only professional sport in the state of Connecticut, and everybody knew everybody around there, and it was very close knit group, and. So that was tough for leaving the area, but at the same time, we still visit a number of different ways and reminisce about our playing days.
As Joel mentioned earlier, you see a lot of people that might have a Whale hat or a Whale jersey, or I went down to Siesta Key last night and was walking down the busy street and somebody yelled out something about the Whales. So it's every now and then you'll get that reach out, and for me it's really a nice thing to be associated with.
You played in Pittsburgh, you played in Philly, you played in Washington, but it's all the Hartford stuff that comes back, right?
There's a lot of it. Yeah, it's amazing. I don't know if it's just because the team is no more, it's turned into real collector stuff or whatever, but whenever you see the Hartford Whalers stuff around, people cherish it, and there's probably I end up signing more of that stuff than anything else.
Kind of like the Montreal Expos of the NHL in a way. I mean, is it kind of odd how the Whalers have lived long after they died?
It is kind of strange. I guess you can attribute that to the strong fan base, the real loyal fan base that they had in Hartford, and for some reason the logo seems to have connected with people throughout the years. Not sure why. I can never really describe those. I'm not a marketing guy, so I don't know what that's all about. But yeah, they always had that. There weren't a lot of them, but they were real loyal fans, and perhaps they've kept the Whalers going, if you will, over the years.
Thanks to those hockey fans everywhere who have kept the recordings, the videos, the hockey cards, the newspaper clippings, you name it, of this one team, so that all of us today can enjoy hockey's past, in the present, and the future. My thanks to the Chicago Blackhawks for getting Joel Quenneville and Kevin Dineen together for this podcast, also to the Arizona Coyotes for Dave Tippett's memories, and thanks to Chuck Caton, Greg Millen, Rick Peckham, and Mark Pucalo for their stories. And while the logo we wear proudly here in Tampa Bay is the blue and white lightning bolt, I know somewhere in your collection of random hockey things, there's something with a whale tail on it. I'm Matt Salmon. Thanks for listening to this Power Play podcast as we colored outside the lines a bit going down NHL's history lane. Join us next Thursday for another